I mentioned one, okay, Jesus appearing into closed buildings, appearing, disappearing, right? Can you think of any other examples where in the Bible, something that might appear as a miracle to the audience might actually be interdimensional interaction?
Yes.
Nice. You're
excited. Yeah, he got
so excited.
My favorite one, Ezekiel's vision, and specifically in the first chapter. Believe it or not, we actually see an instance of extra-dimensional unfolding. It says specifically that these four beings, that their legs had one sole of a foot. So their legs kind of converge down into one sole of the foot. The wings do the same thing. It's not just the tips of the wing, it's the wing. Like they're melded together. And when you look into the Hebrew, it uses a word that means like melded, joined, like there's some fuse, like there's something weird going on. It is extra dimensional unfolding, but it's more than that. It's more than just one dimension.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today at Bennis the Menace. We have a special guest today. We've had quite a few special guests, Ben, haven't we? It's been great. We are so excited to talk to our friend Josh Peck today. Josh hails from Oklahoma, and he's a father. He's got a bunch of kids, and he's got a bunch of knowledge for some really cool stuff that we're going to talk about today. We're super excited to have him. Thank you so much. Remember to subscribe, share, comment, ask questions. If Josh likes us, maybe he'll come back and we'll answer some of those questions. Super stoked to have you, Josh. Can you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself and where people can find you and all the good stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been doing full-time ministry for, probably about 10 years at this point. I've written a number of books. I'm working on my 10th book right now.
Wow.
Yeah. Done some documentary films. I've got 3 of those. A lot of what I research are things that, and stuff I write about is stuff that I've been interested in since I was a kid, but the church that I grew up in, and many people can relate to this, they didn't have answers, but instead of just admitting that, they would try to give an answer that really wasn't sufficient. So, for example, one of the main things that I wanted to know were about aliens. I was a big sci-fi nerd, like when I was a kid, still am. And I wanted to know, like, I remember being, 5, 6 years old and walking up to my pastor and asking, like, what do we do with aliens? Like, what are UFOs? And, well, Josh, it's just demons. It's like, okay, well, where do we get that in the Bible? I want to read about that. Oh, yeah, you just got to take it on faith, Josh. And I never liked that answer because it's like, take what on faith? Like, take it on faith that you're saying they're demons, so they must be. Like, even at 6 years old, like and a lot of 6-year-olds that have a curious mind can relate to that. I think, if you think back to how you were at that age, you just kind of intrinsically know there's something missing there. And I don't want to be too critical of my that pastor or that church or anything. They did introduce me to Jesus. I'm saved because God worked through them, so I'm not trying to be too critical, but that lack of answers about things, it did lead me to go searching for answers elsewhere for a brief part of my life, a few years of my life, which actually led away from Christianity for a while. And that was a really bad, a really self-destructive part of my life. And eventually I came to realize the answers are in the Bible. I just have to read the thing and I have to be open-minded about it. And, so like with the alien question, that started getting answered when I understood more about Genesis 6 and the Nephilim. And that really broke me into wanting to get into ministry, which is what I do now. So I write books and do films, and I try to and do videos. I even just did one recently on topics that you probably won't hear in church, in most churches anyway, but still Christians have questions about these things. And if we as Christians don't at least try to provide an answer, we should always be honest. If we don't know something, we need to just say that. But if we just keep passing it off and just saying, don't worry about it, why are you even thinking about it? they will go and try to find answers elsewhere. And that will lead into New Age, that can lead into Satanism, witchcraft, it can lead into all sorts of things that's not Christianity, which means it's all bad. Right. So my whole role in ministry has been to take interests that I've had, that God has put on my heart, talk about them in a way that hopefully anybody can understand. At least make it as easy as possible to understand, and then hopefully flourish some curiosity within Christianity about these topics. Then, as far as websites and stuff, I work with Prophecy Watchers right now, so the main website would be prophecywatchers.com. I've got I've got some books there for if people want to check out my books. I recommend checking out my first two books was Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots, which I think the direction of this show will probably delve into a lot of those. So I'll just say right off the bat, the best place to get those books, and they have them in a package there, is prophecywatchers.com. And I discourage people from doing it on Amazon, because why would you want to support like a multi-billion-dollar company when you could support a really good ministry that's trying to do really good things? So prophecywatchers.com. And then my main personal website is dailyrenegade.com, where I put up it's basically a video site. It's kind of like YouTube for this kind of content without the censorship. Because I do have a YouTube channel, which is also Daily Renegade, but I can't post full videos there because I get censored all the time, and I get entire channels taken down. Yeah, I had a channel that had 70 or 80,000 subscribers, and then I put up one video. I still don't know how this got the channel deleted. I put up one video. It was my very first mini documentary about my son Nathan, who was going through cancer treatment at the time, and it was just a short, 3-4 minute mini documentary just about what his day-to-day life is like. And they deleted the channel over it. Wow. And I never got a reason why. They put it back up briefly because I had enough people send them messages and stuff. They put it back up briefly, but then I did a video that about so-called Christian witchcraft, and I said that that's not really a thing. You can't claim to be Christian and be a witch. They're mutually exclusive things. And then that got it deleted forever. I was never able to get it back. So I had to start from scratch, which is the channel that I have now. But that's why at that time, when that happened, we were going through my son Nathan's treatment and everything, and I created a Daily Renegade. It's an LLC. It's dailyrenegade.com, and it is a ministry, but it's run like a business. But there's no censorship. I don't have to worry about anything getting deleted. If YouTube takes down my channel tomorrow, I have everything up at dailyrenegade.com. So that's the main website, then prophecywatchers.com. And I guess that's kind of a brief-ish background on me.
Well, that's really good info, because Dennis, if our stuff ever gets taken down, maybe we'll have to form our own, separate network, and we'll call it like the bi-weekly Renegade.
There you go.
Because we don't have enough content to do daily stuff. That's awesome. But that's all, dude. That's always a fear, especially nowadays. That you're going to lose your whole life's work. It's going to be gone just because the techocracy said that they don't like your son's story of his healing. Oh my gosh.
Reason whatsoever given for it. I can't even understand it. The only thing I can think of is at the end, my wife Christina, she's saying just how proud he is that, or how proud she is of him, that he's not angry at God or anything. And this could be a source of inspiration for other parents who are going through the same thing to maintain their faith in God. And it's definitely a Christian-based thing. That's the only thing I can think of why they would have deleted the entire channel though over it, not even just the video. So,
Well,
that's
all
wild,
right,
man. I'm sorry.
If you guys ever see us disappear off YouTube, find us at biweeklyrenegade.com. But okay, anyway, so we've got a wild one today. Thanks for that intro. Thanks for being here, Josh.
And we'll link your stuff. We'll link his stuff.
We'll put links to everything down below, obviously. I want to dive in because today's topic, it's not for everybody, okay? Because not everybody's as nerdy as we are. But to me, I don't think God did. He did some things that are just mysterious and unexplainable. But I also think there's a lot of things that he did that kind of just make sense. And like you were saying earlier, some of the responses you get within the Christian community for these questions, they're just kind of like, even at 6, you're like, really know. That doesn't really make sense to me, And I was the same way. Like I'm a thinker too, and a lot of the responses just don't make sense. But some other religions or some other philosophies or some other scientific perspectives make a little bit more sense. They're completely devoid of the truth of the gospel, Jesus, God, all of that, right? But they've got certain elements to them where I was like, even early on, I was like, well, that makes more sense than the other answer I got. Yeah. So I'm kind of on the same journey where I'm just like, things from a Christian perspective should make sense. And like Dennis was telling you earlier before we got on, I think we need to own these topics because Christians don't just turn their minds off.
That's right.
Those questions linger. And so if people don't have answers that suffice, often they're going to go elsewhere, Right. And there's people nowadays that are running rampant with these kinds of answers, like Rogan and all these guys that are super mainstream nowadays that are giving everybody their 2 cents on what they think aliens are, right? Yeah. You've got all these other scientists that are talking about the multiverse and additional realms and that's how reality works and stuff like that. And it's like, well, I feel like if that was true, as a Christian, I feel like we'd get some kind of mention of something like that in the Bible, but we don't. So like, what the heck are these guys talking about? And how do we correlate that with what the Word of God says? So those are the kinds of topics we're going to get into tonight.
Absolutely.
I'm super excited. I hope it's not too nerdy for everybody and we could kind of like, give humane answers to these things, but I'm ready, I'm ready to get deep. So right off the bat, one of the topics that is really important to me and really helped me kind of make sense of reality itself and the structures of reality and how there can be an eternal God, a spiritual realm, an angelic realm, how this world and life and consciousness could exist here on this planet, but be attached to, but separated from these other forms of reality that the Bible talks about, right? It's the concept of dimensions, okay? And dimensions means something very specific in like the scientific community. And I think we can take that understanding from the scientific community and extrapolate that out into our understanding of the creation, the layered structure of creation that God made. So just to kind of get our toes wet, what is dimensionality from kind of a scientific perspective? Let's start there.
Yeah, sure. And I'll say too, we absolutely can extrapolate a lot from scientific discoveries, but there's a big difference between observation and interpretation. So science, by and large, not every scientist, but just science by and large today is rooted in the idea that there's no God. And this is how things like the multiverse and stuff, it's fascinating of a concept as it is, and we could even talk about that later if you want, but this is how a lot of these ideas came up. It's like, well, we can't have a God, so how did everything come to be? There must be some other explanation. And of course, they give like, Big Bang models and then multiverse Big Bang models, and they're not super convincing because it no matter how far down the road you kick the can, it always comes back to the point, well, you somehow have to explain how something came from nothing, which is impossible according to your very own laws of physics, like your very own laws that you abide by. And they can't really get past that. So, but whether these scientists know it or not, when they do science, and when they do it correctly, they are observing God's creation. They're figuring out how God's creation works, how it operates. There's order in it, so things can be repeatable and testable, and you can repeat experiments and learn things about just the fundamental order of the universe. And so scientists aren't looking at that and seeing God. Some are, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them, they just see that as a natural order of the universe, and they don't really go far beyond that. So I will say that while the observations can absolutely be true, we can learn a lot from the observations that are made. The interpretations that scientists will put onto these things, we got to be really critical of that.
Right.
Really critical. So dimensions, I totally, at least 3 of space and 1 of time, I believe in. I actually believe there are higher dimensions too. But basically what the idea of a dimension is it's basically what you have access to within a certain amount of space. So in our 3-dimensional space, that's what we call our reality. We have access to basically 3 directions, and they're all perpendicular, which means they're all at right angles. So we have forward, back. That counts as 1 dimension because back is forward if you turn around. So we got forward, back. You got side to side, and you got up and down. And those are all perpendicular lines. And you can orient that wherever you want in space. You could be facing this way or that way, and you still have access to all of those. But we only have those 3. Right. And in geometry and some other mathematics, it's just the X, Y, and Z axes. So that's our world. And then we have 1 of time. And the reason that we only have 1 is because we go forward in time. And there was a past. So in a sense, we can't travel back in time. But in a sense, we were there before. So, but there's no such thing as like sideways time. There's no at least not that we know of. I can't even imagine what something like that would be like. But, and I've tried, I've written a blog about that. But as far as we know, and even biblically, I don't think that there's any other dimensions of time. There might be, and God just hasn't revealed it, but there's certain things in the Bible where I think it's just this 1 dimension and we all share it. Obviously, God is outside of that. God himself is not bound by time the way we are, but he can interact with it. Right. So where it gets really interesting is trying to think about dimensions higher than our own. So we know that we have 3 perpendicular, meaning at right angles. We have 3 directions that we can go. Now imagine a 4th dimension would have to follow those same rules. It would be another perpendicular direction. So it would have to be at a right angle to all those other ones somehow. And it would have to be a new direction. We can't imagine that. So one of the best explanations I've heard to try to explain what a 4th dimension of space, we're not talking about time right now, only space, what that would be like. I first heard from Chuck Missler, and it's a phenomenal presentation. He goes through this thought exercise called Flatland. I did have to watch it about 10 times to really get it.
Okay, so it's not just me.
No, this is everybody. It's totally fine. But the exciting thing is you can get it. Anybody can get this. It just takes some time because we're not taught this. I believe if we were taught this stuff from early on, it would be like second nature. We're never going to be able to visualize in our heads the 4th dimension ever, but we would at least kind of understand the concept of it better. So Chuck Missler, and he wasn't the first to do this. Like any physicist that talks about dimensions, they use this example called Flatland because it's just the best example we got. It's based on
I'm sure you're just going to say it. It's based on Edwin Abbott, I think was his name, right?
Yep.
The first person I heard talk about this was probably like 15, 20 years ago. It was Carl Sagan, and he's giving a presentation. You can look it up on YouTube. It's called Carl Sagan, 4th Dimension. Okay. And it's a fantastic presentation. And this was 20 years ago. I was probably like 15. And as I'm watching this thing, and I was Christian then too, as I'm watching this thing and he's talking about this and Sagan's like very anti-God. He's not giving glory to Christ through this explanation by any means, right? As he's talking about this concept and explaining, I'm like, oh my God, that's how Jesus appeared in closed rooms. That's how people transported from here to there. Like it literally all made sense. That was the first time that I started asking weird questions like this because of Carl Sagan, who's like an atheist, giving an explanations of how dimensions actually work. And so now go into what it means, okay? Or how it's explained.
And isn't that amazing too, that because the church doesn't talk about this stuff by and large, some do, but because they don't, we have to go to atheistic sources to even begin to start a journey in understanding this.
And thank God I was already saved.
Yeah.
Because if I wasn't, I would have just followed in the interpretation of Carl Sagan.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So if we just owned these topics and gave satisfactory answers to people who are critical thinkers, maybe we wouldn't lose so many kids in high school or in high school, college. You know what I mean? Where people tend to fall off. Okay. Explain Flatland, because this is exciting.
Yeah, and I love it, because this is the closest that we can get to understanding what a fourth dimensional reality would be like. And the first step is just understanding you're never going to be able to visualize it. You're never going to be able to. And that's okay. We're not meant to, but that doesn't mean that we can't know things about it. So the whole concept of Flatland is, imagine there's a two-dimensional universe, flat. They don't have up or down. And, imagine that there are beings called Flatlanders that exist in this universe. And the universe doesn't have to be very big. It could just be the size of your tabletop, or, maybe hovering like 2 or 3 feet off your tabletop or something.
It could be like a sheet of paper.
Yeah, exactly. And it's empty space, and they exist in there. They can move around in there, but they don't have access to up or down. Something has been cut off from them, which I could talk about that too, because I actually just did a video on that. What the sword in the that turns every which way in the Garden of Eden was actually cutting. But we can get into that a little later.
Let me write that down.
Imagine that Flatland. It's cut off from the third dimension, which generally we would say is the z-axis, up and down. So they have forward, backward. They have left and right. No up or down. Well, imagine if Flatland's right here, and let's say I want to put a 3-dimensional object in Flatland, but they don't have up or down. How would they see that? Like how would they, like, if they're looking at it, how would they see it? And there's a bunch of examples of this, but a common example is, well, if you drop a ball through Flatland, you could drop the ball. The Flatlander eventually will see every part of that ball, but it sees it in stages. So first, when the ball breaches Flatland, they'll just see a point in space, like just in front of them. If you drop it right in front of them, they'll just see a point, and then they'll see something start to expand. Now, imagine their perspective. They're looking straight ahead. They're only seeing kind of like a line, but they could probably, if they traveled around it, they could put together that it's a circle, just like, if I have a ball in my hand, I can't see all sides of that ball, but I can turn it around and see that it's a ball. It's the same kind of thing. So they are seeing a circle, but they're seeing it just like as a line in front of them. So they see a point, and as the ball goes through Flatland, this point expands out bigger and bigger until the full circumference of the ball is like the ball is halfway through Flatland. Yeah. And then they'll see that line shrink and disappear as the ball falls out. They wouldn't know what they were looking at. They would have no clue to put that together, that's a 3-dimensional image. It's the same if you do it with a cube. It would be the same thing, but it would be a square. Now, again, they're looking straight ahead, so they would see a line, or if the corner is in front of them, they might see, but they would be able to perceive that it's a square. Right. Now, if you wanted to show as much as you could of a cube to a Flatlander, how could you do that? Well, one thing, and this goes into a whole other thing that we can get into later if you guys want, but one thing is, and it's a big term, but I'll explain it. And by the way, just for the audience, don't get intimidated by these smart aleck scientists that want to use these big terms. Really, what they're doing is they're trying to, and I shouldn't generalize, not all of them are like this, but this language is created to make them look like they are so smart you can't possibly understand it. But really what it is they're kind of speaking a different language almost. Like that's all it is. And once you can kind of understand what they're talking about, it's not that like the words are just so complicated that you couldn't possibly understand. Anybody could understand this fine. It's just this. It should be the scientist's job to speak in a language that everybody can understand. So it's called extra-dimensional unfolding. A really big word, but all it means is, like, you take a cube. Let's say Flatland is right here on my table. I take a cube, I put it down, and let's say it's hollow, so I can actually unfold this thing. Well, when you unfold a cube, you get 6 squares. 6 squares can be folded up to make a cube, and the 6 squares look like a cross. It's right. It's like that shape.
I'm drawing it right now because these are very visual topics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's such good representations out there if people want to look it up. But if you unfolded there you go. If you unfolded a cube, it would look like that. It literally would look like a cross, right?
Yep.
1,
so
2, 3, 4, 5,
you got
6.
Well, you would have 2 on the bottom there, but it's basically the same thing. There
Correct.
you go. You got it. That's it. So a Flatlander could see now the Flatlander could see every side of that cube. The Flatlander can't put together what that shape is supposed to look like in its natural 3-dimensional environment, but it has access to the most amount of information possible from that cube. It basically has all of it. It doesn't know up or down, so it can't put it together in its head.
Right.
So let's take that 1 dimension up. Let's say if there was a cube of 4 spatial dimensions instead of 3. And there's actually a name for it. It's called a hypercube. So if a 4th dimensional being, a being of 1 more spatial dimension than us, wanted to show us what a hypercube would look like, how could it do that? Well, it could do the exact same thing. It could unfold it, except instead of squares, we get cubes. And because we get 1 extra dimension, we get 2 extra arms to the cross. So basically, it's a stack of 4 cubes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then on the 3rd cube, on each of the 4 sides, there's 4 more cubes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's like a cross with 2 extra arms.
Dennis, Google this.
It's called a tesseract.
Okay. Dennis, Google it. You're going to screen share. We need to see these things. Because it makes sense it makes more sense when you see it.
Absolutely. And that's the hardest part about sometimes doing interviews like this and trying to just convey it with language, because visuals really help. Yeah. And in my book, Quantum Creation, it was the first book that I'd done on this topic. So those are the hypercubes. And
but they're not stacked. Like I was looking for like this one kind of is.
That's a tesseract. Yeah, there you go.
Click that one.
Yeah, so see how it's 4 cubes from bottom to top, and then you got 1 cube on each side.
Yeah.
So it's as if the arms of the cross are going out left, right, forward, back.
Yes. So that's what a hypercube would look like if it was unfolded into our dimension and we could have access to the most amount of information about it. Now, just like the Flatlander cannot look at the 2-dimensional cross and put together a cube because they don't have up or down. Well, we don't have these extra 2 dimensions, or this extra 1 dimension, these extra 2 directions. We don't have those other 2, so we can't put together what that would really look like in its natural 4-dimensional state. Right. So the best that we could have is that.
So that is one way that it helped me understand these concepts is as you what's it called? Descend, right? Into a lower dimension, you're limited to that dimension.
Yes.
Higher dimensional beings, entities, objects, shapes, higher dimensional objects cannot exist in a lower dimensional plane because that lower dimensional plane doesn't have all of the directions available to it.
Only a slice of them can. Yeah.
Only a slice.
So they technically can. Like I could, if Flatland were real, I could put my finger in Flatland and I could move it around and they would see basically a circle, but again, it's not, they're not looking at it top down. Sometimes that confuses people. When I say they see a circle, I don't mean that they're literally seeing like a circle like in front of them.
They're seeing the walls around the circle.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They can perceive the circle in the way that we can perceive a sphere if we're looking at a ball. But I can exist in Flatland, but I can't exist as a Flatlander.
Right.
I can, and there's a really interesting correlation here. So I can put my finger in Flatland, move it around. I can put 2 fingers in Flatland, go like this, and they're going to think that's 2 different objects if they're looking at it as a cross section from right here. Now, this gets into some really interesting territory because how many lay people who have no background in quantum physics have reported seeing UFOs that do this exact thing, but in 3 dimensions? It's a point and it blows up. It splits off into 2. It splits off into 3.
Yep.
They move all around independently.
Yep.
They come back together and they disappear. Well, that makes perfect sense if there's higher dimensions.
Exactly.
And because that's what you would expect. And you don't even need technology to do that. If a flatland universe existed, I don't need technology to put my finger in there or to walk through it or to somewhat interact with it. I just can't fully interact in the way that a flatlander can. I would be the extra dimensional being in that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you get all of these lay people, none of them have background in physics, and they're explaining this extra dimensional stuff that they should have no way of knowing about. And to me, that lends evidence that this is probably real. There must be higher dimensions. I think higher dimensions are what we would call, the spirit world or, heaven, hell. There's anything beyond the 3 dimension, just anything beyond physicality, the 3 dimensions of space and one of time as we know it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Because that's the first time I started seeing these orbs and things change in shape in the sky and appearing, disappearing, defying the laws of physics and all of these disclosures that are going on now. The first thing that popped into my mind is interdimensional. That's the first thing that popped into my mind. And it's all because of this video that I saw 15 years ago from an atheist scientist. You know what I mean? Explaining just how dimensions work. Like, he wasn't talking about how there could be other beings and they might be aliens and there's no God. And he wasn't getting into that. Just the foundational understanding of this is how dimensions work. And so when a higher dimensional being or object interacts with a lower dimension, that object or being is limited to that dimension. You can unpack it, like you were saying, and they could kind of understand what that object looks like in their dimension, but they cannot understand what its full what it fully looks like, what its entire shape is like, because they're limited to that lower dimension. And so for us to be like, well, let's just hypothetically say angels are in the 4th dimension, demons are in the 4th dimension, right? The spiritual realms in the 4th dimension. For us to be like, well, what do they look like? For us to do that is completely impossible because we're limited to our 3rd dimension. Everything we know has forward, back, up, down, left, right. There isn't anything in our there's nothing in our 3rd dimension that's even 2D. There's nothing in our 3rd dimension that's perfectly flat.
Right.
Everything in our dimension has up and down. Everything has some kind of volume, a cell. Right? Everything has some kind of volume, except for maybe like, I don't know, light or something. I don't know what.
Well, that's a good point because technically, and we would assume the same for our own reality. Technically, the 2nd dimension, and I do believe it exists. I just don't think that I don't think there's 2-dimensional beings there. We would have discovered something about that.
I don't think there's consciousness in the 2nd dimension.
There's not. But the 3rd dimension is made up of 2-dimensional slices, and there is actually a thickness to these 2-dimensional slices. It's called the Planck length, and it's the distance that a single photon can travel in Planck time, which is the shortest amount of time that you can possibly have, which that has all sorts of weird implications to it.
Jeez.
But so there is actually a thickness. It's just so it's so thin you can't even think about it. Like it's and the weird thing is too, this means that when a photon travels, when anything travels, it skips. It doesn't go from point A to point B, and there's a journey there. It just goes from point A and just skips to point B. Time is like that too, which is totally trippy. You know how movies are really just a bunch of pictures moving around real fast? Like if you take apart like an old VHS tape and you look at it under the light, it's single images. And you can do that digitally too. Time is actually like that. Like that's what time is. It's not this smooth river. Time in itself is blocks of 3-dimensional stillness, and we go one to another to another
That's
to another.
wild.
And we do it so fast that it's seamless, and we don't even, I move my hand, and I don't know that that's, 3-dimensional segments of space-time happening one after another. But that's what it is. And this has been measured, this has been mathematically proven, just that's how God created the universe, which is absolutely fascinating. And it's like, man, we gotta give credit to God for this kind of stuff, because that blows my mind. Physicists have known this for years, and it's like, why isn't the church talking about this more? It's hard to understand, because it goes against what most of us have been taught in like high school science class. A lot of us, myself included, a lot of us haven't pursued science education past high school, and so it goes kind of, because it's not that science class in high school was wrong. It's just too simplistic. It doesn't really get into a lot of this stuff. Yeah. So it kind of goes against that. But yeah, that's what time is. That's kind of how everything works. And it's just, man, it's mind blowing.
There's one more thing to note before we go on. If people are following along, man, I hope you are, because this stuff's so exciting. But in one of the things in that video, that Sagan talks about, he says that because the flatlanders, are limited to their second dimension, and there's no up and down, their houses, and this is a great example, their houses would just be little squares, right? Or little triangles, whatever shape their house is.
Yep. They don't need a floor. They don't need a roof.
It would have walls, but they don't have floors and roofs, because there's no direction to look up to see a roof or to build a roof. Everything is perfectly flat, right? And so he gives the example of like, okay, if there's a 3-dimensional, and he holds up an orange, he's like, or an apple, and he's like, if there's a 3-dimensional entity outside of the second dimension, it's above. And when the flatlanders are like, where's above? They have no idea, because they can't look up. There's no third dimension for them. They just look around, right, in their second dimension. So if a 3rd-dimensional apple looks at the flatlander in his house, he's looking into the building, because he's up and there's no roof. So to me, the second I heard that, I'm like, and he said, and if he wanted to engage with the flatlander and enter into the space, the 3rd-dimensional object would just appear.
Yep.
Because he's coming down from this other dimension, and he pops into the second, right?
Yep. So
I'm like, oh my God, that's what Jesus did when he entered the locked room, right? Exactly. They specifically say the door was locked in the upper room, where everybody was trembling and fearful and praying, and Jesus just poof, appears into their building. That's because he comes from a higher dimension.
Exactly.
And he doesn't need to go through a door. He doesn't need to go through the roof, because whatever the 4th dimension is, and just like the flatlander can't look up or point to his buddy and be like, it's over there, we can't be like, well, Jesus comes from over there. Like, we can't, we can't do it, because it's outside of our ability as 3-dimensional beings. But when you see these orbs that are on the news now, and that there's disclosures in the Pentagon, Tucker Carlson's talking about them now. If you've watched, he just put out an interview with Joe Rogan where he talks about how he thinks UFOs are interdimensional and spiritual. Okay. It's becoming very, very mainstream now, these concepts. So as Christians, if we don't have explanations for what these things are, these are the guys that are going to run with these topics and give the masses something to believe.
That's right.
Okay, so that's a good intro to what dimensions are. Okay, hopefully people tracked along. I think it would be really cool if we had I'll probably link something on dimensions. Does Missler do like a presentation on it, or does he just talk about it? He actually does like a visual presentation.
I don't remember what it's called, but yeah, and I'm sure, because I don't think Koinonia House got rid of anything of his, so cool. I'm sure it's still up there. But yeah, it's a full presentation. He's got a couple of them, I think.
I'll look. If I find something from him, I'd rather link to that than the Sagan one.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'll take what I could get, to be honest. Do you think that there's any? I mentioned one. Okay, Jesus appearing into closed buildings, appearing, disappearing, right? Can you think of any other examples where in the Bible something that might appear as a miracle to the audience might actually be interdimensional interaction?
Yes.
Nice. You're excited.
Yeah, he got
so excited.
My favorite one. And it's so cool that we're talking about this, because I literally just did a video on this that's not released yet. probably tonight after we're done with this, I'll
Nice.
get it up on dailyrenegade.com. But so Ezekiel's vision, and specifically in the first chapter, believe it or not, we actually see an instance of extra-dimensional unfolding, because there's weird descriptions in that whole vision, and most of the things that we see online, people trying to artistically depict what he saw.
Dennis, Google it, Dennis.
Yeah, I don't want to say that they're like wrong, because that sounds mean. Because I had to read the thing like 50 times before I could. There's details in there, but what's strange is it says specifically that these four beings, that their legs had one sole of a foot, so their legs kind of converge down into one sole of the foot. The wings do the same thing. And a lot of depictions show the wings kind of touching, but when you really look into it and actually go into the Hebrew, and I do this in Cherubim Chariots, again, prophecywatchers.com, it's not just the tips of the wing, it's the wing. Like, they're melded together. And when you look into the Hebrew, it uses a word that means like melded, joined, like there's some fuse, like there's something weird going on. So what I think, this is an example of, I don't know what to call it. It is extra-dimensional unfolding, but it's more than that. It's more than just one dimension. So imagine that we have the hypercube we talked about before in 4 dimensions. Now you unfold that into our dimensions, and we have the tesseract thing, the cross with the 4 arms. We can understand that. But now imagine you want to show a flatlander the tesseract. You want to show a flatlander, a 2-dimensional being, what a hypercube looks like. Well, you got
4-dimensional.
Yeah, you got to unfold it again. Well, now some of those squares are going to start overlapping over other squares. They're going to start sharing the same space. They're going to fuse together. They're going to meld together to the Flatlanders' perspective. Right. So I think what we're looking at, and it's also really interesting too, because when you really dig into that, these angels have like the appearance of a tesseract, which is kind of cool. But even beyond that, the melding effect. Yeah. And Ezekiel wrote this 2,600 years ago. He didn't know anything about quantum physics.
Or dimensions.
Nothing about that.
Nothing.
Like, there's nothing in, he was in, Babylon at the time. There's nothing in that culture that had anything even close to this.
Right.
So he had no framework. He was just recording what he saw. Weird as it was. He was just recording what he saw. And so he talked about this fusing together kind of thing. That is to be expected if these were at least 5th dimensional from the, if there's, I personally, and I could get into why later, but I think there's 12 dimensions of space. But if there's if it's a 5th dimensional being, then you have to unfold it so many times just to get the 3-dimensional being to a point where they can even understand what they're looking at without it constantly changing shape and form all the time.
Yeah.
That you would have some of those pieces look like they're fused together. That doesn't mean that they are actually fused together. Right. It would just look like that. It's
a 3-dimensional representation of a 5th-dimensional object.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's also why when John sees the same creatures in Revelation, they're all separate. He describes the same creatures, same faces, but they're all separate, no fusing going on, because that's in the throne room of God. So John's going up to and up is a relative term, but you know what I mean. He's going to this higher dimensional reality, and he said he didn't even know if he was in the body or in the spirit or what.
Right.
But he was going there. He was seeing them in their natural habitat. They're not fused together in their natural habitat. They're separate. It kind of makes more sense.
Yeah, in the throne room of God. So in that dimension, those 4 beings are separate entities.
Yeah.
But when Ezekiel sees them here in the 3rd dimension, they're actually one being fused together.
It looks like that. Yeah.
That's the limitation.
Yes.
They take on the limitation of the 3rd dimension.
You got it.
Because that's what happens when higher dimensional objects or entities enter into lower dimensional space.
Yep,
right?
You got it.
So is that why he talks about like different faces and different?
I think it could be, because we do see those same faces, but in Revelation they're not fused together. They're separate beings. So I think that's why those are fused together as well. I mean, it's all this, and the angels are are also fused into this weird, and I don't mean that derogatorily. I think it's awesome. But there's the wheels, which that's a separate class of angel called the Ophanim. And then this whole thing, this whole living construct is carrying the throne of God on this big expanse or this firmament above all of them. And it's all melded together in this really strange description. And the only way that makes any kind of sense
right.
Is if there's extra dimensions and these are extra dimensional beings. And the really mind-blowing part is the fact that Ezekiel wrote this 2,600 years ago, and physicists today know this mathematically, that this is exactly how this would work.
Right.
Like,
I love that.
And it's been in the Bible the whole time. Like,
dude, it's amazing.
That blows my mind. That's so exciting to me because, like, there's no way that that's fake. You hear, like, atheists, like, there are some physicists I like, and there are some that I really can't stand listening to.
Right.
Like, Lawrence Krauss. I can't stand listening to the guy. He's one of these. He will speak so openly and like outrageously against Christianity, but he doesn't. He it's like he hasn't really studied it to know what he's even criticizing. Because and I say this, I don't mean to disparage the guy. We should pray for him. He needs to be saved. Right. But he'll say things constantly. He was on Joe Rogan too, and I watched that. But he'll say, "Oh, this was just written by a whole bunch of ignorant goat farmers." Like, read Ezekiel. You're a physicist. Like, read Ezekiel. Like, extra dimensional unfolding. You know what you're looking at. He did not make that up. He couldn't have.
Right.
Which, by the way, also the whole goat farming thing, I don't think that's a very easy thing to do anyway. I don't know that I would know how to do it. I don't think Lawrence Krauss would know how to do it.
I'm like, man,
I digress on the Lawrence. I'm not trying to badmouth Lawrence Krauss. It's just there are really militant atheistic physicists out there that will say things like that ignorantly, and really we really need to pray for those people. But
that's another good point. Is people will kind of just like disregard the Bible because they're like, oh, it's 4,000 years old, it's 2,000 years old, it's just a bunch of goat farmers. First off, I wish I knew how to farm goats because that would be awesome today, right? That guy's not going to be able to buy eggs in the next like pandemic, and he's going to be freaking out. If I was a goat farmer, I'd be rich in that regard. But what people don't realize is these were ancient humans, ancient men that were trying to describe with their words from 2,000 to 4,000 years ago, things that they were seeing, which were supernatural, which were spiritual, which were interdimensional, which were alien, which were whatever word, fill in the word, whatever you want to use. These were people that were trying to describe what they're seeing. That's why even Ezekiel, when he's seeing this unfolded being, right, in the third dimension, he's like, it looked as if it were burnished bronze. It looks as if it had the face of a man and the face of an eye. It looks as if it's like this, it's like that. He's using the word like because he doesn't know how to describe it.
Yeah, he just reported what he saw. There was no agenda behind it. He wasn't trying to describe.
He's trying to describe it as best as he can with the literary tools he has in his day, 3,000 years ago. Yep. What would you describe? Like, this is what people today are trying to do when they see orbs and aliens and crafts and things flying around. They're using today's words. They're using dimensional. They're using extraterrestrial. They're using, it looks like an alloy. These are words we have. Yeah. It looks like an orb. These are words we have. They couldn't use these words 3,000 years ago because they didn't have those words. They didn't have those concepts, right? So they're just trying to relate what they're seeing with the words they had. And we do the same thing. So to be fair, if we lived another 2,000 years, if mankind went on for another 2,000 years, the words we're currently using on this podcast to describe things around us, telephone, computer, whatever, word, right? These would be antiquated words to people 2,000 years from now. And they think we're just goat farmers or whatever equivalent that is today. You know what I mean? So it's really, that to me also is like, was a big revelation. Yeah. Where I'm like, oh my God, these guys, they might not necessarily be describing, especially when you get into John and he doesn't know if he's physically there or spiritually there, right? I would say he's probably in the spirit. And that's why he sees them as 4 individual beings rather than any kind of culmination of the beings, is because his soul is in that dimension, and he's able to describe them as separate. But then you get in, the throne room, and he's like, it looked as if it were a rainbow and a man made of jasper and a sea of glass. And you're like, those things aren't real, but I see what you're trying to say. I see that you're trying to describe something that cannot be put into 3-dimensional words,
Yeah. And it's like, I appreciate and love that so much, because you can tell all throughout the Bible, these people, they're not stupid. They're just trying to, they don't know what they're looking at. Just like if I were to see a UFO do that, I wouldn't know what I was looking at. And I would try my best to not use charged terms like UFO or something like that. I would try to just explain as plainly and simply as I could. And you can see how that concept gets hijacked by like the ancient alien crowd, because they'll say, well, Ezekiel saw a spaceship. He just didn't know. He says it's full of eyes, or John said it's full of eyes. That's probably just windows. It's like, well, no, because in Hebrew they had. I think Ezekiel would have known a window if he saw a window. Like, even if it looked a little different, he wouldn't have said, oh, that's an eye. There was a Hebrew word for window. There was a Hebrew word for door. And by the way, if you want to make, with the ancient alien thing, if you want to make what Ezekiel saw, if you want to make that a spacecraft, it's got to be coal-powered, because that's the only combustion we see. And that's if I believe that's in chapter 10. Because we see it twice in Ezekiel, chapter 1 and chapter 10, and then we see the beings themselves in Revelation. But it would have to be coal-powered, because there's coal combustion there. I mean, now I think that's all that. I don't believe that was powering the craft. But if an ancient alien type person wanted to stay true to the text and say that this is a spaceship, they would have to go in that direction, and none of them are willing to do that, because you're not going to travel to another planet on coal.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so let's go a little deeper. For those of you that have stuck around, are we in the 3rd dimension? Okay, this is how I see it. At least this is how it makes sense to me. Some people might think I'm crazy. I'm really not trying to be like heretical or get beyond the Bible. I'm trying to understand, trying to make sense, try to ask questions.
There's nothing wrong with asking questions.
And if somebody's like, no, it can't be that because the Bible says this, and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. My bad. I'm gonna go back over here to the Orthodox view. So we know this biblically. We know that there is a spiritual realm, right? There is, Paul talks about, I knew a man that was caught up to the 3rd heaven. So Paul references additional layers of reality, right? Additional dimensions, we could say with our words today. Do you think that our souls are actually in a higher dimension?
Yes. So, and I gotta unpack that some.
Yeah, of course. Otherwise, you're going to be in the heretical stuff that.
New Agers love this stuff. Like, New Agers love to take these things and twist them and turn them into other things. So I actually think, and I don't know. Well, there's a couple different ways to look at it. So we clearly, if we're Christians, we have to believe that we have a spiritual component to us.
For sure.
So it really comes down to, what is spirituality? Is a spiritual essence, or a spiritual, what would you call it, matter? Or is it something wispy and ghostly that kind of doesn't exist? Or is it, on the other hand, where it's like so super physical that you can't even see it because there's so much physicality to it? And so there's a couple different ways of looking at it like that. I tend towards the super physical side, because the way
what do you mean by that, super physical, that we can't even see it?
Let me explain, because
sure. So
if it was more the ghostly, wispy side, and if we accept that dimensions exist and everything that we've talked about so far exists, well, is our soul 2-dimensional? Is it 1-dimensional? I don't think so. But when we see these, like, it would be like this. This actually gets into another one of my books too, so I can talk about this.
Sure.
It's sort of like this. Imagine flatland. When we imagine that, we imagine squares kind of moving around. Imagine they're actually cubes and they just don't know it. Like imagine that they're cubes and their two-dimensional physical body, what they would consider their physical body, is actually the part that's in their universe, in Flatland, the part that they recognize. But imagine that they're actually cubes and they just don't know it yet. Now, what kind of makes me lean towards this, I wrote a book called Afterlife. And in that book, I went through like a whole lot of near-death experiences. I don't believe all of them. I believe a few. And I believe that God in his providence gives some people these experiences for reasons that are totally his business, and I'm not going to question them. But again, I don't believe every single one. There's a lot of really dubious ones that I absolutely reject. But there was some there was a couple scientific studies done where they've tested they've asked questions about people that have had these near-death experiences and what did they see. And a lot of times it's the typical, there was a tunnel, there was a light, there might have been a life review, something like that. Just usually kind of what you hear. But in a small percentage of some of these people, they describe things that could only be understood if we're actually extra dimensional. And it's like, well, maybe they were making it up. They're laymen. They're like auto mechanics. They're construction workers. Like they're not studying quantum physics. They wouldn't know how to make it up in this way. But right. So one example, there's this guy that I don't, in the study it didn't say what caused the experience, a heart attack, something, who knows. But he was in his living room laying on his couch and he had a near-death experience. And he said that when he in a sense left his body, he had 360 vision. He could see all parts of the room at the same time. Now imagine what we talked about earlier. We're extra dimensional beings to a flatlander. So if they have a box, if they have a house, we can see inside the house, outside the house, right. all around the house. We can see the flatlander. We can see the flatlander's neighbors. Like we can see all of it. A fourth dimensional being, if I have, like if Amazon ships me a package of whatever, a comic book or something. If I have that in the box, I can't see in the box. I can't even see the whole box all at once.
If you're in the third dimension.
Yeah, if I'm in the third dimension, I can't see the box all at once. I got to turn it around to see all parts of the box. I got to open it to see what's inside. Only one dimension up, a fourth dimensional being would be able to see inside that box, outside the box, all sides at the same time, plus the top and the bottom,
right.
and me, all my internal organs. Right. Like they'd be able to see all of that. Well, that's what some of these near-death experiences are saying, and they say it in their own words. They're not making it up. They can't be. I mean, there'd be no way for them to know how to do that. But they're explaining the same thing. So that really got me thinking. Like, wow, are we cubes that think that we're squares? Like, we kind of get this sense that our physical body is not all there is. There's something greater. Right. There's something more. There's something like the synapses that fire in my brain and the chemicals that go off in my brain. That's not my consciousness. That's not my sense of self, or that's not who I am. There's something more. And as Christians, we know that there's a spirit and a soul. Some people put the spirit and soul together. That's a whole other debate. But there's something spiritual within us. Right. Well, what do we mean when we talk about that? We know we're going to be glorified someday, and we have one example in Jesus of that happening. And when he was glorified, he's able to do these extra dimensional things. So it makes me wonder. It makes me think. Like I wonder if we are actually cubes that think we're just squares, and we just don't know any better. I can't say That's for cool. sure. Who knows for
That's
sure?
That's really cool.
Yeah, maybe it is just a wispy ghost in there, and we just don't know. And of course, I try to be careful in exploring these ideas because New Age absolutely latches onto this stuff.
Totally.
They love it and they twist it. They twist it to make it sound like you can create your own reality. You can access like other dimensions. And I would highly implore people out there, do not do that. The Bible speaks against it. If you want, I have a whole book on that too. Second Coming of the New Age. I came out of New Age.
Wow.
Yeah. When nice. In my intro, when I said that I had these questions and it led me down a dark path. I went into New Age and I got into astral projection and all this stuff. And
I remember that.
It's horrible.
I remember that from your video. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe it's absolutely real, but it's absolutely forbidden and horrible. Just like demons are real, but we shouldn't make friends with them. So it's the same thing. So New Age will tell you like, yeah, all that's real, but you can tap into it and you can control it. Absolutely not. We are put on this earth for a time. We have a physical body for a reason. God gave us that, and he expressly forbids us to go and try to explore these other dimensions. We can think about them and talk about them and just, bask in the awe and wonder of God's creation. We absolutely can do that, but we can't go explore these things on our own, nor should we, because they're dangerous. There's other beings out there that we can't even comprehend, let alone like be able to defend against their deceptions and things. There's just so much we don't know. So it's just like when you tell your kid, don't touch the stove, it's hot. They don't know what a stove is, if it's a young kid. They don't know how a stove works. They don't understand that. It's like, I don't want to waste time explaining all of this. Just don't touch it. It's hot. And they go and touch it anyway and burn their hand. It's the same thing. It's God didn't spend 1,000 pages in the Bible explaining everything about the spirit realm, because the Bible would be so long no one would read the thing if he did that. But he just says, trust me, don't mess with this stuff. You're not equipped for it. I didn't make you for that. I made you for this. Be a three-dimensional being. Get saved. Spread the gospel. Take the Great Commission seriously. When it's your time, you'll understand everything later. And so I kind of rest in that, and I'm fully that's fully sufficient for me. But the exciting thing is we don't need the experience, because there are actual answers to these questions. So we don't got to go try to search for them on our own through astral projection or remote viewing or DMT or any of these other things.
And those things, they might actually be having, and I believe they are. They might actually be having very real encounters.
I believe it's real. I believe it's real. It's just really
spiritual. Dangerous. Yeah, that's good. It's real, but real dangerous.
Yep. Yeah. This is coming into like questions that I have now, like as far as, and I don't want to derail this conversation, and we don't have to talk about this now, but more like, how did you get,
I'm going to write it down.
How did you get back from going down that road?
Oh yeah, totally.
Hold on. We'll get there. Okay. Hold on.
I'm known for derailing conversation.
I'm also very interested. I'm going to write that down. Testimony.
Yes, testimony. From the New Age back to Christianity.
Because I can't listen right now with everything that's going on in the world. New Age is coming back with a vengeance. Okay, because they're the ones that have explanations or attempts at explaining a lot of these things that we're discussing and that people are witnessing or experiencing themselves. Yeah. And the Christian orthodoxy hasn't really necessarily done a very good job of engaging with these topics, so it leads people elsewhere. Just like I went and looked up information on dimensions from Carl Sagan, an atheist, but what you were saying earlier, let's go back a little bit. What you were saying earlier about, are we cubes having a square experience? Let's go with that. So to use the analogy of as before, if this is the second dimension and there's let's call him Mr. Penn, and he goes into the second dimension, he's going to, if consciousness exists in the second dimension, that sliver of him inside the second dimension is having a second dimensional experience.
Yep.
Okay. He doesn't necessarily, because there's no up and down, he can't look up and down. He doesn't know that he's a pen. He just thinks he's a circle inside of the second dimension, and he's experiencing the second dimension as a circle, right? And you're saying, and I love it, because I might agree. This is, so far it makes sense. I'm just trying to be logical and fair with like the way these things work. And also with what the Bible says, because the Bible says we have a soul. Right. Where's our soul? I don't know. I can't touch it. It's not here. You could open me up. There's no soul. I can't point to it because it's not here. It's not in the third dimension, right? But nevertheless, the Bible and and literally every other religion in the world, also says that there's a spiritual component to humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even Rogan says that we might be souls, kind of like what you're saying right now. We might be souls having a human experience. And in this dimension, the way I see it is, in this dimension, this is what consciousness looks like. It looks like us, okay? Thinking, making decisions, having free will, having the ability to connect with the spiritual or the supernatural and Jesus, things like that. That's only possible with this body, this brain. This is what it looks like here. This is how God created it. This is what consciousness and experience looks like in the third dimension. In a higher dimension, consciousness, will, experience, relationship looks like something else. It's called the angelic. It's called the demonic. It's called, those are the words that God gave us for that. But if our soul is experiencing this dimension, this is the only thing it can look like.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So if we are the cubes, if our souls are cubes, if our natural state or our true state is the cube, but we exist in this dimension, this is what our experiences is going to look like. And we can't look outside into the spiritual realm and be like, oh my gosh, I'm a spirit, because we can't get into that realm. We can't access it, because this is another thing in that video about Flatland is you realize that lower dimensions can't access higher dimensions at will, but higher dimensions can access lower dimensions.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? And so when Jesus says that he knows or when the Bible says he knows every hair on your head, right? It's kind of like what you were talking about earlier, where God can see, or higher dimensional beings can see into closed spaces or into your body. He knows every hair on your head, literally, because he knows all of that information instantaneously, being outside of this dimension. When it says that he knows every intent of your heart, when he says he knows your thoughts before you think them, or your prayers or whatnot, that's all possible if it really is operating in this hierarchical structure of reality. But the New Age does get really weird with it, and so do all the other religions, man. So they're really talking about something real, but the enemy's like deceiving and manipulating and ending somewhere completely false.
Yep.
So let me ask one more question then on this idea of us having, I guess, of us being squares having a 2D, or us being cubes but having a square experience. Are angels and demons also having square experiences?
I think that they can if they choose to, but it would be like if I wanted to interact with Flatland. I could do it. I don't need technology to do it. If Flatland existed.
Right.
I could do it. But I don't have access to a two-dimensional body. Now, the weird thing, though, is it seems like angels kind of do, because in Jude, it says that when the angels fell, and it references Genesis 6, that it gives us two descriptions, and when you drill into it, it's not only did they leave their home in heaven, but they also left their body, their habitation, their in Greek it's oikterion or something, and I'm probably butchering that. I don't know how to speak Greek.
Is that first estate?
Yeah, there's a first estate, there's an estate, and there's like a body, and in I want to say it was quantum creation. I dug into the Greek on all that, and it seems to be saying that when they fell, not only did they leave their estate in heaven, their position in heaven, but they also did something to limit, like they had to have access to some kind of lower dimensional body to even be able to procreate with humans. And the Bible, as far as I know, and I could be missing something, but as far as I know, doesn't really get into the mechanics of that or how all that works. But apparently it does. I mean, there's other points where angels have appeared just regular people. So it seems like,
right.
And I mean, practically, it kind of makes sense. If an angel is just a messenger, it's a job,
Right.
An angel isn't a species. Like the word angel just means messenger. It's like a job title, kind of. If your job is to take messages from heaven to earth and not freak everybody out, because we know what happens in the Bible when an angel shows up to a regular person when they don't look like a man. I mean, they're so scared they fall on their face, and the angel has to say, like, don't be afraid. If you want to do your job effectively, well, you need access to some kind of body that's not going to freak everybody out. And so I think that's why we see in, like the Sodom and Gomorrah account, they appeared as men, when even God himself, when he appeared with Abraham, he appeared as a man. That could have been a pre-incarnate Christ kind of thing. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. But so I think they have access because they're messengers. They at least have access to some type of thing that we don't really have a one-to-one correlation to that. I'm not set up as a messenger to Flatland, because there are no Flatlanders.
Right.
But if I were, for me to effectively do my job, I would need access to a two-dimensional body to be able to do that. Or a watcher. If I was supposed to watch and record things or whatever they were supposed to do, if I don't want to scare everybody, I would need access to some kind of body. So I think that angels do have that capability, and they also have the option to abuse it, because God gives angels free will too. We're not the only ones. We have free will. Angels have free will. I don't think he created any robots or automatons. He created everything with free will. But because we don't have that specific job, we don't have that specific capability. Apparently, angels do. So I would say they are probably way more equipped of understanding what their reality is. But the interesting thing is, because of that, and because angels have been face to face with God, I mean, they were singing praises during the creation, there is so much more accountability to them.
Right.
That's why there's no forgiveness. I mean, there is no forgiveness for angels who have sinned. You sin one time, you're out, you're done.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it says, and I can't remember exactly where, maybe Hebrews, but it says that, like, angels will, like, look at us and they're really interested in this whole idea of grace.
Yeah.
Like they're really interested in that. I think we have the same thing, but it's with his justice. It's with his judgment. They understand his justice. They understand his judgment. The good angels that stick with God, they praise God for his judgment against the angels who have sinned. They don't question it at all. They're not like, well, why isn't there an angel Jesus saving them? There's nothing like that. They have higher accountability because they've been face to face with God. They know these things. They know this in a way that we don't. And in a sense, the way that God is, he doesn't interact with us the same way he interacts with angels. There's grace to that. There's grace because that gives us time to choose. That gives us more time. Whereas with angels, it's just bam, done. It's just done. Once you sin, you're out. So they're fascinated with the idea of grace. We're fascinated with the idea of justice. There's Christians that don't even believe in hell because this question is so prevalent. It's like, how can a good, loving God send somebody to hell for all of eternity? Well, when you really look into it, and again, I don't fully emotionally understand it. I believe in it because it's what the Bible teaches. If there's eternal life, there's eternal contempt. It uses the same word for eternal. So if there's eternal conscious life in heaven, unfortunately or fortunately, and I just don't have the right perspective right now, but just however you look at it, there's eternal conscious torment, separation in hell. Right. You just can't get around it. It's the same exact word. So you can't have one without the other. And I'm not going to be able to fully explain that. I'm curious about it. And it's even kind of scary. It's horrifying that any one of us could have been in that position. So while I can't fully get my head around it, I can trust that God knows, God is just, God is perfect. His judgments are just. I've had unsaved family members that have died, and I know that they're unsaved, and I love them, and it's tragic, but I know at that time, once I'm there, I'm going to understand. And it says that there's even rejoicing happening, and it's not because we're rejoicing that they're in so much pain and we're nasty about it. It's that it is tragic that this had to happen, but they had free will. This is what they did with it. This is the judgment, and it's good that God set it up this way. Like,
right.
And again, there's parts of me that it's like that is really hard to emotionally, get there. It's hard, but trust, I think, transcends emotion. So all that aside, I think in the way that we might be, and I'm saying might, be cubes that are having a square experience, I don't think the same exactly applies to angels. I think they know exactly who they are, what they are, and I think that separation happened really as a grace or a courtesy to us.
Yeah.
And I think that happened at the fall. I think that was part of the curse. But I think that was, it's like, okay, humanity screwed up. We cannot let Adam and Eve have access to the tree of life. We need to cut this out. Like, we need to have this sword and these cherubim protecting this, because if he gets at that tree of life, he's eternally in his sins, and then he's like the angels. He's like,
right.
He can't be redeemed. So God kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden, and then there's this sword that turns every which way. I think, and this is just a theory, I cannot prove this on scripture. This is just
that's okay.
Just a theory.
I like this.
I think that sword literally divided our dimensions of space from the angelic dimensions of space, where we don't have access to it. Now, I'm not saying that Adam and Eve were superhuman before that. Adam and Eve were always human. They had to be, because Jesus was human, and he's the one that needs to represent us. So if Adam and Eve were a totally different thing than Jesus, then he wouldn't be worthy to represent us. So Adam and Eve were absolutely human, no superpowers. They're not flying around, in the Garden of Eden. Like, they're not. But they might have had access to. And I don't mean that they could like travel there whenever they wanted. I just mean, I think there was more. They were able. There was more of an access. Might not even be the right word. There was more of like a free. I think like angels, God visited Adam and Eve a lot more than they would be doing that now.
Yeah.
So I don't think that Adam and Eve could access higher dimensions or anything. They might have been able to at least perceive them easier, because at this point they wouldn't have had any scales over their eyes from sin or anything like that. Before the fall.
Well, we know this from the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Sin, evil, can't exist in the presence of God.
Right.
So the second Adam and Eve sinned, they can no longer exist in his presence.
Right.
Okay. And the garden, certain translations will say it was the garden in the east in Eden. So the garden is an even smaller section within a certain spot in Eden. Garden and Eden are not synonymous. They're two separate. One is within the other, right?
Yeah.
So I like the idea that the garden may have actually been, again, let's just use words. Listen, we're not your pastors. We're just buddies talking. We're thinking out loud here, trying to make sense, right? So I like the possibility that Eden may have been not necessarily interdimensional, okay, but may have been like an overlap between some place where, because listen, we know
it's like a meeting point.
It's a meeting point, okay?
Well, and I don't mean to cut you off, but you know that word east, where it says east, that comes from the Hebrew word kedem, and there are some times where that same exact Hebrew word is used as eternal, or like from eternity. So it could be. I mean, there's even times where that word is used to describe God, and it's translated in English as eternal, the eternal God. Because you wouldn't say the eastward God. So it could be that this point was like a meeting point. It doesn't mean that Adam and Eve were superhumans or anything. It just means this was a place where, God would meet with Adam. The serpent had access to it, obviously.
Oh, for sure.
And then later on, after the fall, the cherubim had to protect it and keep Adam and Eve out of there, because again, the tree of life, that would have put them eternally in their sins. And we see the tree of life restored when we're glorified. We see that in Revelation. So there is a purpose behind it. And really, ultimately, what it is that God wants to provide for us and wants us to accept his provision. So we're, in a sense, when we partake of the tree of life, we're partaking of, and this is in the future, I'm not saying we can do that now. And actually, if this is all true, the Garden of Eden could still be on Earth. You could walk through it, think you're walking through a desert and not see it. Because, again, and I don't know, but if this sword split and made a division between the third and fourth and higher spatial dimensions, then we wouldn't see it. We would have no way of accessing the tree of life, and thank God for that. Because how many people would absolutely rush to that to get immortality, but not realize, oh, there's a judgment coming.
Yeah.
There is a judgment coming, and if I eat this, I'm immortal, until then, but then I'm going to be cast in the lake of fire because I'm eternally dead in my sins.
I've never heard that. I've never heard this concept of the tree of life causing, if you did eat of it, now before the end of the world,
Dennis, hold on, think about it. This isn't even in the note. This isn't part of the conversation plan, but I like it. All right, let's cook a little bit. Hey, think about it. Do you really think God in the third dimension on this planet created, and again, I could be wrong, I'm just thinking out loud here, created a tree that produced a plant that if somebody ingested it, gave them immortality? Or could the tree of life, which was in the garden in the east, which sometimes means eternity, so possibly this meeting point, right? Could there be something supernatural, extra dimensional, not of the third dimension, that actually does impart immortality in a higher dimension? And that's what Adam and Eve were supposed to eat from to live forever. And that's actually what it talks about in Revelation in the New Jerusalem, that the nations will come in and do what? Eat of the tree of life again.
Yeah. And that's why we don't see it again until we're glorified. Yep.
Exactly. So was there really an apple that they ate and it gave them immortality? Or was it something extra dimensional that they imparted of? And that gave them immortality here in this third dimension. You see what I'm saying? I like it.
And just to be clear, I actually do believe it was an actual fruit and it was an actual tree. I just think that it was positioned in a place where it was in a place where God could commune with Adam and Eve.
Sure.
And even other spiritual beings could too.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that necessarily the Garden of Eden has to be extra dimensional. But I have no problem with the idea that it was just a tree and some fruit. But there was something special about the place that it was in, where when that cutting off happened, they had no access to it. And I don't think it was only because the angels wouldn't let them in. Because they would have just camped out there. I think that they just lost all accessibility to it. And you could. It would be like. You can take, I can take a flatlander, let's say there was a flatland Garden of Eden. I can take that and put it in my world, in my three-dimensional world, even just up here. They don't have access to it. Doesn't mean that the garden is necessarily or extra dimensional. The garden doesn't have to be three-dimensional. It can still be a flat garden, but I can just move it up just a little bit, 1 inch, and now the Flatlanders are all set. You don't have to worry about them being tempted to get to the garden because they can't get to it. It's totally inaccessible. And the reason that I make that distinction too is because a lot of people and New Agers, and again, I've got this whole past in New Age, so I'm maybe even too much, but I'm hypersensitive to it, to the point where it's if it sounds New Agey, I got to give it a lot of thought.
Good.
But
I respect that.
Yeah, and not that I'm totally opposed to it, but for three-dimensional beings, I would assume God would have given them a three-dimensional fruit from a three-dimensional tree, but that doesn't mean that it can't be put into a dimensional space that they don't have access to. Because again, that sword, and the four cherubim, they were in the garden, and that sword that turned every which way. What a weird way to explain it. Every which way. Could that mean dimensionally every which way?
That's a really good point.
And the way that it's described, it doesn't say that any of the cherubim actually had the sword. It seemed, I don't know, but you could make the argument that the sword is just turning by itself. But what if that What if that just cut off the dimension and said, okay,
Right.
nope, Garden of Eden is here. It's here. It's still a 3-dimensional place, 3-dimensional fruit, but we cannot have you have any access to it because you will be dead in your sins if you do. Yeah. So we're going to wait. We're going to have that, not have access to it. And for all I know, the 4 cherubim and the sword could be still guarding that today, and just making sure that severance remains until God says, like, okay, we can restore this now. And maybe that's why we don't see the restored Garden of Eden, if we could phrase it like that, or the Tree of Life, until the very end, where everything is totally restored. And once again, we have access to it, but now we're sinless. Like now there is no temptation. Like we've been through that already, and we've had that healed. Like we're glorified now. And now we have access to God who has only wanted to provide for us. And now he can do that, and we can receive that forever, for all of eternity. Like, and I believe it's that fruit from the Tree of Life that sustains our eternity. But it's not like there's not going to be any option where it's like, well, what if you just don't eat it for a week or something? It's like you're going to be perfect and sinless. It's just like there is no, that would be sin. Nobody's going to do that. Like that'll be out of our nature at that point. And when you read a book like Hosea, and I think this really helps us envision it. Like when you read Hosea, when Israel was in total rebellion and going to these false gods, and the way that God describes his own feelings about it, I think is so beautiful, because he at first just basically chastises Israel, saying, you did this, you said that you're going to get all these provisions from your gods. I'm going to take all this away from you. I'm going to dry up your shrubs and, dry up, like you're not going to have anything. It's going to be drought. It's going to be horrible. But then after that, he says, because he loved Israel so much, he said, but I'm going to receive you back, and I'm going to provide for you, and you will know that it is me who has always provided for you. It was never these false gods. And to me, that's like an example of like the bigger picture with us. It's like we rebel against God, and we want to do things on our own, and we want to say that like we provided for ourselves, or our heroes provided for us, or whatever. And God is obviously justifiably angry at that, because that's totally wrong. He's the only reason we have blood in our veins pumping through our heart, or air in our lungs. But then when he restores it, he's like, but I will give you these things. And I think that's why the way that it's set up, we're still eating from the fruit of the Tree of Life, because it's a constant reminder. He is providing eternity to us. So we won't ever forget it, because every month it's a new fruit, and that's, strangely enough, that's even in the eternal state. In the eternal state, every month, that's part of why I think there's only one dimension of time, and I think God designed it that way for a reason. John heard silence for half an hour. When you read that, the ancient Essenes, who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, they absolutely believed that time in heaven runs perfectly concurrent with our time, and that's why it was so important to do the festivals and do the feasts in a certain way on a certain day, because in the heavenly temple things were happening too, and we see that in Revelation. That's why Revelation 8, you see something that's similar to the Day of Atonement ritual. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. It's because in the heavenly temple and the earthly temple, these are supposed to be done at the same time, and so it's absolutely fascinating, and it's exciting to me that even in the eternal state, and when I think eternity, I think timeless. But even in then, there's months. There's 12 months. This is a perfect
segue into my next question about time in higher dimensions. And listen, if we had more time, like if we had 3-4 hours together, I would love to keep talking about Eden, because I would get, Dennis, we've talked about this before at length. Hey, the Ezekiel 28 passage where it talks about the mighty chariot, the mighty guardian cherubim, which is Satan, okay? Or he was the sealer of perfection. He was kicked out of the mountain of God. And that to me all aligns with what we're talking about here, okay, about Eden. But we don't have all that time. Yeah. So we'll go on to the next question. I really appreciate the what is it called? Trying to be like the careful around topics like this, because I have so many friends that are new agey. Okay. And I talk to them about stuff like this and about Christ and about all, and they're like, yeah, Christ. And eternality and spirit and light. And I'm like, hold on. I don't think you're saying what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're using the same words, but like something's off over here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's weird because like I see how close they are in like concept.
And that's by design. That's by design.
And I totally agree with you. And then there's just these little like subtle changes along the way that lead somewhere completely off. And I'm like, whoa, how'd you get there? Like, I thought weren't we just kind of talking about the exact same thing, you know? But I'm kind of like, I don't know. I'm seeing this happening a lot. And I don't know. I keep having these conversations with people about stuff like this who are in the new age. And it's almost like we can also reverse engineer it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And be like, hold on, do you see that I'm saying the same thing?
Yeah.
But I'm arriving at Jesus. You're arriving at yourself. I don't know, astral projecting into the universe, right? And I'm arriving here because of these texts and because this was said for the past 2,000 years and that Jesus said these words. And you believe in Jesus, but you're saying something completely contradictory. Yep. And they're like, and
I was in that same boat. It's so super deceptive. Like, and when you're deceived, you don't know you're deceived. Like,
for sure.
Yeah, it's tough. But yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you guys giving me the freedom to and not taking it like I'm just shooting down all your ideas or anything.
Oh, dude,
I promise I'm not.
I hope you do, because like if I'm off, I really want correction. You know what I mean? But I'm not. These are for me. Again, it's hard because we're so used to looking at a screen and being like, tell us information that we should believe from an authoritative source. And I'm like, I'm just talking to my buddy Dennis and Josh. Like, we're just discussing these topics. Yes, Ellie.
Come on, dude.
Oh my gosh.
It's crazy.
That's not the best.
Do you see it?
He looks so unhappy. Is he okay?
That's awesome. Look at that, though. It's crazy how much you guys look alike.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I can see it.
All right,
Josh, and what's funny is we started this show with Ellie discussing we started this show with so people are gonna think he's back.
I know. Hey, Ellie knows so much about this stuff.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, dude, so funny. I love it. Okay, let's man, I want to respect your time. We're at an hour and a half. You know, I don't want to go over if you don't have the time. If you do, we're here all night, baby. Or we'll just schedule another, we'll schedule another time.
Yeah, I would like to schedule more time with you because of the new age stuff, and especially because we need it. We need to have a whole episode on that, man.
We do, man.
Because, it's good to get all this stuff out, but that's like the stuff that really touches the heart, right?
Yeah.
And this is all fun, but okay.
Oh, that'd be great. And I want at least an hour on the multiverse. We're not going to get there.
We do need to do the multiverse. Yeah, not tonight though. We can't. But no. I would like to do the multiverse. Do you want to talk about the time thing, Ben?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Let's hop back into that. Okay. So before we took a break, so we were talking about the higher dimensions and time and how they may experience time. Mm-hmm. We experience time like we understand, right? There's a past, there's a future. We're in the present. That's our third dimensional experience of time, right? Our square experience. Yeah. Do you think that the higher dimensions experience experience time in the same way? And let me just add a little bit into that too. We know that angels were created. Angels are not eternal.
Right.
God is eternal. God was not created. God had no beginning, has no end, right? Mm-hmm. We know that one of the qualifiers of experiencing time is there has to be a beginning, right? So these additional realm, or this additional dimension or realm that the angelic and the demonic exist in, has to be experiencing some sort of time, right? I mean, they have to be, right? Because they were created.
Yeah.
So creation...
They had a beginning.
Means there was a beginning. And for anything material, there has to be a beginning. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if there's no beginning, you're eternal. And that means there's no time.
Right.
So unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but that means angels are experiencing time. We are clearly experiencing time. What do you think about our souls? When were our souls created, or when do they get created?
Oh, man, that's a great question. Okay, so I used to believe long time ago, because I heard it and it was interesting. I used to believe that we existed in heaven before we were born. I don't believe that at all anymore. Not one bit.
Yeah.
I've heard that too.
Yeah,
too.
and you know, it's a nice thought. It's kind of sweet, and I mean, there's even some like ancient medieval texts that talk about that from, you know, early Christians. I mean, not that early, just like 1200s, 1300s stuff. But when so we have one example. We have the example of Adam. God created Adam's body and breathed the breath of life, and then it says in Genesis, when God did that, Adam became a living soul with the breath of life.
Right.
So that was essentially at the same time that the body was created. I mean, yeah, it might have been like a second later, but it's essentially the same time the body was created. He breathed the breath of life, and he became a living soul, meaning he was not a living soul before. He couldn't have been.
Right.
The language doesn't, as far as I understand it, doesn't allow for it. So I believe that at the same time that physical creation happens, which is at conception, I believe a similar thing is happening spiritually. So when we reproduce physically, yeah, you know, you could say like God created my children. Absolutely, for sure. If you're looking at it from just purely a physical, biological standpoint, well, you know, my genetics and my wife's genetics created that. I think something similar is going on spiritually, and I do believe just in the same way that God has a hand in every biological body creation, he has a hand in the soul or the spirit creation too. So I'm not just diminishing that. I'm not saying that he set the process going and then he just backed off. I think he still has a hand in all of it. But I think a similar kind of thing is happening where at conception, not only the body, but the spirit and the soul is created as well. Now, that doesn't mean that God didn't know that person, because God, he's outside of time. He knew me before I was born. He knew me before I was even anything, because I'm bound by time. He's not.
Right.
Once I'm with him, I'll probably understand it a lot more. Don't really fully understand it now, but I can't get beyond that. He became a living soul part of it. And it's like, why was that put in there? I think it's to tell us Adam was not a living soul before that. And there's a whole bunch of, I would consider really erroneous texts that talk about, Adam and Eve in heaven, or people in heaven before they were actually born, and they go through this whole process, and it's all this stuff.
Right.
But they don't account for that Bible verse. It's like, well, then why did God put it in there that he says that he became a living soul? If he became one, then he wasn't one before. And the soul isn't something physical. If it said he became a living body, then I could totally understand. Sure.
Right.
You know, he didn't have a living physical body before that. But a living soul, it specifically uses that word. So no, I think that at conception, your body's created and your spirit's created, but at the same time, God knew you before that.
Do you think he knew you because he thought of you?
No, I think he actually knew me. I think he knows me now. I think it's part of that, but he's outside of time. So God is, in my opinion, and the way that I can understand that, to be truly outside of time, it means he's existing at creation right now, at the crucifixion right now, at your birth, my birth, at our glorification, in the eternal state. He's just there. He's just anywhere that you could possibly be in time and space. He's there and present. And so I think that's how he can say, like, how I can understand God never had to get to know me. Like, he knew me 100 years ago. He knew me when he created Adam. Like, he knew me. I didn't know him. But he knew me and knows me, and in that state, you know, with him being outside of time, he can experience this in a way that we never will be able to, but we're always going to have an appreciation for and a love for. even more so when we're on the other side of all this. But he deeply knows us in a way that we can't even know each other, in a way that is so personal and intimate. We're never going to really fully be able to get our heads around it, but we can trust it because he's God and he doesn't lie. So no, I think like 5 minutes before my conception, he knows me just as well as at the moment of my glorification.
Do you think that, I mean, this is kind of a weird one. And if it gets
the other ones were totally
normal.
No,
those are totally normal. Yeah. No, if it gets too weird, I might take it out. But do you think that, and this is just me thinking out loud.
Yeah, yeah, not a problem.
I don't want to influence anybody. I don't want to put thoughts in anybody's head. I'm just thinking as we're talking. Because the same way you're saying that God knew you, and I agree, God knows us before we were ever born, right? David says that.
Yeah.
The same way it says, or the same way we know God's outside of time because he's eternal. He's the only thing that has no beginning, no end, wasn't created, right? If we are cubes having 2D experiences, do we hear on Earth when we reproduce, create more cubes in the spiritual realm?
Do we what?
Do we here in the second dimension, when we reproduce, create more cubes in the higher realm?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, if that's correct, then yeah, we would. Yeah, I think that would be like.
Then are those?
If that interpretation of the soul is correct, and I'm not saying it is, but if it is, if the soul is an extra dimensional thing, if it's an extra dimensional body, is probably not a great word, but if it's an extra dimensional thing. Then yeah, right at that moment, that conception, it would create the physical body and also the soul and the spirit all at once. So yeah, I totally think that would be the case.
So are our souls in the presence of God?
That's a good question. In a sense, if you're thinking outside of time,
yeah.
From God's perspective, yes. From our perspective,
right.
No. Well, I mean, we're in the presence of God in that the Holy Spirit dwells within us. So there's that. But from God's perspective, Ephesians has some really interesting wording about how we're seated with Christ. And it says in present tense that we are seated with Christ. It says like when we accept him, and I'm this is what I call a Peck paraphrase because I have a terrible time remembering exact wording of verses, but I get the basic gist of it.
You get the Peck paraphrase? Dennis, this is what I call senior gist. I just give the gist of.
I love it. I love
That's great. But yeah, it says something along the lines of, we were like dead in our trespasses.
Yeah.
But when we accept Jesus, we are seated with him in heaven. Well, we know that as a prophecy. That's a future thing that happens. We will get to sit and rule with him, and there's a bunch of prophecies about that. But to us, that's a future thing. But when Paul says it, he says that that's already like you are seated with him. Like it's present tense. You are. And so when I read that, it's like, from God's perspective, I am there. I am at the moment of my birth. I am at the moment that I got into New Age and rebelled, and I am at the moment that I came back to grace. And I didn't exist before I was born, but other stuff happened back then. And so, from his perspective, I am seated with him. But from my perspective, I'm not yet. So that's where we got to be careful because. Again, and I know I harp on the New Age a lot, but it was my deal. It was the thing that I most identified with at my biggest point of rebellion. Now they will take that and they'll say, "Oh yeah, see, the Bible says you're seated with him. You're already an ascended master. You're already there right now, just as you are." No, because we don't experience time the way that God does. Like he doesn't experience time. Like He created time. We experience time. He and in some sense always will. We're never going to be fully outside of time the way that God is. I don't believe so. I believe that God reserves that for himself. But to him, from his perspective, we're already there. And I think that's what Paul may have been trying to describe. Like, in the eyes of Jesus, he is so good, he is so holy, he's so loving, and he offers us so much grace that even when we're sinning, like even when we're like dead in our trespasses, like when we accept Jesus, we are seated with him from his perspective, not from ours. We don't see it just yet, but there's grace there. Like there's a grace there. There's a real love and beauty there, I think. So yeah.
I think the only way that makes sense is God's got to be outside of time. It's just another proof that he's outside of time.
He has to be, otherwise time would be above God, and then time would be God. Like, and that doesn't.
Well, he'd be limited. He'd be limited, and he's not.
He'd be limited. He'd be created. He'd be within time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's no way that's possible. So for something to be true and not true at the same time can only be the case for God, because he's outside of time.
When he spoke existence, I think he spoke all of it all at once. All of it. Every single bit of it. Past, present, future.
Right.
I don't think he spoke initial creation and then he like backed off and just let things happen the way.
That's a cool way of looking at it. I never thought of that.
I think he just literally just spoke all of it, including time, because he had to have created time. Time wasn't a pre-existent thing. Because before the beginning, in the beginning, God was already existing. And even saying already existing, it shows the limits of our language, because that's not exactly right. He literally is I am. Like he literally is. Like it's not even he was. It's
our language is three-dimensional. The same way
exactly.
You know what I mean? The same way 2D, the same way flatlanders would have a hard inability to describe the third dimension, even if they experienced it, even if they were taken up into the third dimension, right? They still wouldn't be able to describe with their two-dimensional words. And that's what we're trying to do. That's literally what we're trying to do.
I like that, Ben. 3D language.
That's great.
That was good, man.
Nice. I got one.
As my friend Ben would say.
It's interesting because you just hit on something I think's curious, and let me know what you think. When God created, right? God outside of dimensions. You said earlier you think there was 12. We don't have to get into that because there's reasons for that. Okay. But that means that all of the dimensions, all of the realms, all of these layers were created at a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In time.
Yeah.
Probably all dimensions are to some degree affected by time. At least we know they all had a beginning.
Yeah.
The only thing that did not have a beginning is God himself, right?
That's right.
He is. So we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, right? There's one dimension is just a dot, right? Just a dot. There's no left, there's no right, there's no up, there's no down, no line, no nothing. That's impossible for us to conceive because we're stuck here in the third. 2 dimensions is left, right, I guess forward, back, but no up and down, right? But the second dimension is built from a bunch of 1 dimensions.
Yep, absolutely. You cannot have a second dimension without the first. And you can't have 3-dimensional world without the second.
Exactly. Similarly, the third dimension is 2-dimensional stacked into the up and down. So you take 2-dimension flat, put them on top of each other, and you get volume. You get up and down. I wonder if the 4th dimension or 5th dimension, wherever our souls are, is us, the 3rd dimension, stacked.
That's the version of the multiverse that I actually believe in. So,
nice.
Did you guys just become best friends? Did we just become best friends?
No, I think you're absolutely right. For there to be a 4th dimension, it would have to be created. It would have to comprise of 3-dimensional slices. Now, I'll qualify that by saying I don't believe there's other 3-dimensional universes where there's consciousness and there's other beings and there's different versions of me and you. Don't believe that at all. Now I will say there could be. There's nothing in the Bible that says that there can't be. But if there was a multiverse like that, like the classic, it's called the many worlds interpretation, but what most people think of the multiverse, like, when I was a kid, it was the show Sliders. Now it's like Marvel movies and stuff.
Right. I would call these timelines.
Yeah, yeah, okay. They're like timelines. So they would say that that's like a multiverse where there's every decision that you make is it creates a branch timeline.
Branches off. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't believe that.
I don't either. I have no reason to believe that. But I'm also not going to totally discount it because there's nothing in the Bible that says that it's not that. All it would mean is those other versions of you aren't really you. They're different. You know, they may be, even right down to your DNA, they might be the same as you in bodily form.
Yeah.
But they would have a different soul and spirit. They would be they have free will, right?
Right.
That's the whole point. They have free will so they can make different choices and create these new branch timelines. Well, some of them might reject Christ. That doesn't mean you're going to hell, you know? That means
exactly.
So
and the Bible says it's appointed for man to die once and once be judged.
Yeah, right? Exactly. So they would not be you. Like they might be you biologically, but we know that that's not us. Like my biological body is not the 100% version of what I am. There's more in there that's me. This is just like when you buy a car and drive a car around town, the car isn't you. That's a vehicle.
Right. It's not even that. Like God created this timeline.
Yeah.
It took his action to do so. Our decisions are not something that creates.
Exactly.
Our decisions are not a mechanism of creation. God does that.
It's a great way of explaining it. And so I have no reason to believe that version, the many worlds version of the multiverse is true. Okay. Now, what I would say is I am open to the idea, and this isn't ever talked about, but a version of and I'll try to go through it briefly, but the version of the multiverse that says, well, for there to be a 3-dimensional world, it's made of 2-dimensional slices that we can actually measure by the Planck length. Like we can measure those. They exist. And for a 2-dimension, but that doesn't mean that the 2-dimensional universes have any consciousness or beings. They don't. We would see them. They don't. So for those 2-dimensional slices to exist, there have to be 1-dimensional lines lined up. And for those lines to exist, there have to be points. So it just stands to reason for there to be a 4th dimension, there would have to be extra 3-dimensional universes. But again, I'll preface it by saying there's no reason to believe that those are inhabited because none of the 2-dimensional universes are inhabited. I mean, we would see little floating like flatlanders all around if that were the case. There would be some way of determining that, but there's not. We're made up of these 2-dimensional slices of our 3D world. So what if our universe is one slice of a 4-dimensional space, and the only way that we can really think of it is like stacked on top. It's not really that, but that's the best we can do. So, you have these 3-dimensional universes, in a sense, stacked on top of each other to create the 4D world, and then so on and so forth, up to possibly the 12th, maybe more, maybe less, who knows. But that doesn't mean that any of those would have to be inhabited. Now, there are 4-dimensional beings, just like there's 3-dimensional beings. I don't believe there's 2-dimensional beings because there's just no evidence for it. I think we're probably the lowest in that regard.
Yeah, the lowest. We're the lowest form of consciousness, I think.
Yeah. So, but that doesn't mean that those other building blocks don't exist. They most likely do. So yeah, I have no problem. Oh, and there might even be scientific proof for this. So what's really cool is the force of gravity. So every force has an associated particle. So if you have a gravitational force, if you have a gravitational field, you have a graviton particle. And now the graviton has never been actually observed, but it's pretty much a done deal that it exists. Because every field, the electromagnetic field, that's what produces photons. That's light. There's a Higgs field and there's a Higgs boson. So when we interact with these fields, it does some strange things. So when we have Have you heard? Okay, we talked about the time dilation thing a little earlier, but have you also heard that when you travel faster, you also pick up more mass?
I think so.
Yeah,
you get heavier. Okay.
Einstein proved that.
Okay.
And it was officially like a done deal in 2012 when they discovered the Higgs boson, because you can't have a Higgs boson without a Higgs field. Well, the Higgs field, mass is not just, it means we have extra stuff in our bodies. It doesn't mean that. Mass is an interaction. It means that you're interacting with a field. And if you interact with it more, you're heavier. If you interact with it, well, not heavier exactly, you're more massive. Mass and gravity are different. Heavier means gravity. If you interact with it less, you're less massive. So the faster you travel, you're busting through this field at high speeds. You're interacting with it more, meaning you're picking up more mass. You're because mass is an interaction. This is exactly how a photon, which is the particle of light, can exist and be massless. It just doesn't interact with the Higgs field. That's all it is. But that's how, because when we think mass, we think substance. Like if you're massless, you have no substance and you can't exist in physical reality. That's kind of the model we were taught in high school, but that's not exactly right. It's an interaction, and some things don't always interact with others. Okay, so in our reality, from what we can observe, everything interacts with gravity at least to a minuscule amount. Now, like on the quantum scale with particles and stuff, we don't really know. That's a big mystery. That's a big question mark. But with big things, for sure. And the bigger something is, the more massive something is, the more it affects gravity, which also affects time. And that's why I think that there's actually a time field and a time particle, just like gravity, just like electromagnetism. Because the more massive something is, it affects time. Like it makes time go slower or faster depending on the mass. So why wouldn't it be different? Now, the weird thing is, gravity, even though they haven't observed a graviton, we know a lot about the gravitational field. And there's four main forces. There's electromagnetic, there's the strong and weak nuclear forces, and then there's gravity. Gravity is so much more weak. It's so much weaker than the other forces. The other forces are pretty comparable. But for some reason, gravity is a lot weaker. Nobody knows why. It's like a big mystery. But they've been able to determine through mathematics that if the graviton exists, which it does, even though we haven't discovered it, but it has to because gravity exists, they've been able to determine that the graviton would actually have the ability to traverse dimensions if extra dimensions exist. So the theory is maybe gravity is so weak because there are higher dimensions and there are other things sharing the same gravity as us, and gravity is a lot weaker because of that. So what's really interesting, there's this whole theory. When they study galaxies are spinning so fast that based on our current understanding of gravity, they should be flying apart. But there's something extra holding them there. Something extra. And they call that dark matter because they don't know what it is. They think that there's dark matter particles. I think a much simpler explanation is that's extra dimensional matter.
Right.
We know there's a spirit world. Like we know there's other creation beyond, and we're seeing it affect the gravity in our own world. Our Earth is actually, and heavier is kind of a loose term, but like our world is heavier than it should be based on the mass. Like our Earth is heavier than it's supposed to be.
Right.
But we're told in the Bible, hell is in the bowels of the earth. There's gates of the ocean and stuff. I don't think that's a physical thing. I think that's extra dimensional stuff. There's pillars of the earth. Flat earthers love to climb all over that. But I think this is extra dimensional stuff that God has created, and it's affecting the gravity of Earth and making it appear more massive than it is. And really what it is there's just extra dimensional material that we can't detect.
I believe that. I mean, like we just said, higher dimensions are built of lower dimensions.
Yeah.
That's how the physics works. That's the science. Okay, that's how it works. So that means that the dimensions interact with and have effects on one another. if the third dimension has an effect on the second, do you think the second dimension's like, hey, we can explain this effect perfectly because we understand the third dimension and we know and realize what's going on? No, they come up with the term like dark, I don't know, dark energy. Yeah, they would come up with a term for whatever they're experiencing that they can't explain. They come up with the term for it and they just move on, as if that's okay. But we know that the dimensions interact with one another. And for me, it's being that God is the only thing outside of dimensions, and he created the entire structure and the infrastructure, right? And the mechanics of all of these things working. To me, it's like God's the only one that's not affected by those things.
That's right.
But he is the one that can be sovereign over all of those things.
Absolutely correct.
Because he's not only sovereign over the third dimension and our human experience consciousness, he's also sovereign over the angelic dimension and over their experience and over everything that they're doing, right? And all of it was to bring Jesus about and to glorify Jesus and his grace and his justice and his judgment, and to expose who God truly is through Christ, through Jesus.
And isn't that amazing? Isn't that like, even if, whether we're right or wrong about any of this dimensional stuff we've been talking about today, like let's say we're right or we're wrong, it doesn't matter. God loves us so much that even despite all that, if he's got 12 dimensions to work with and time and all this stuff, he still loved us so much that he sent his only son to die in our place so we wouldn't have to be eternally separated from him. And
dude, like that's incredible.
That's like the main takeaway. I mean, to me, it's like he's sovereign over all of this stuff that I can't possibly understand. I can't even understand one dimension above my own, let alone, who knows how many more, let alone outside of all that. But still, he's so powerful and he loves us so much that he still sent his son to die in our place. And Jesus loves us so much that he was willing to do that, to die in our place so we wouldn't have to be eternally separated from him. That to me, like, to me, that's what gets me excited about all this stuff. We talk about these huge, big concepts, but really it comes down to that really simple, eternal truth.
Yeah.
And it's the Great Commission of Jesus. It's the good news. It's that he died for you. You don't have to be eternally separated from it. You don't have to die in your sins.
Yeah.
And man, to me, that's what it's all about.
Dennis, what were you going to say?
Well, the fact that we don't understand is the proof of God, right?
Yeah.
Like the fact that his wonders are wonders, right? That the strange things are strange to us, right? It just shows that there is a God, there is a creator, there's a designer that we cannot fathom. And that to me is what ties all this together. And it requires faith. It requires a lot of faith, and it's cool to try to dig and understand. I mean, I think that's amazing. I think he smiles when we do this, fun. And he's just like, hey, my kids are trying to figure me out, and like I have a daughter, right? And so she's like trying to get to know me or when she asks questions like, so Dad, did you ever have a bully like in school? Like she's asking questions about like, so when you got in trouble? Like what was it like? And I love that, that she's trying to understand me and more about me. And that just shows that, God's heart. I think that he loves all this. But what a great way to end, all this, because we are so confused at times, right?
Yep.
And
that's
I think
what makes it fun, though.
It does make it fun. Yeah. And it could also make it dangerous in a sense if you
want to use it towards your own ends and you want to be like, well, I don't really care about the truth of God. I just want to make this mean what I want it to mean.
Yeah.
Right.
Then,
or I have to understand it, right? Yeah. Like I need to understand it.
Yeah.
There's I don't think I can find it this fast, or fast enough. But there's a quote about your understanding kneeled before. I'm going to mess it up. So if I can't find it, I'll find it another time. But listen, Josh, I'd love to have you back and talk about.
Can I just tease the next question when you come back? Okay. I'm going to give you something to think about. And again, I don't want to get too weird. Is Jesus, God having dimensional experience?
Yeah. That's what makes him human.
No. Don't answer it.
That's what makes him human. He's got to be human.
Come back. Yeah. Okay. Wait till you come back. Okay. Josh, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man, this was so good.
I can expound on that more next time.
Exactly. I'm going to leave that cliffhanger in there, so you got to come back. Okay.
Yeah. And we definitely need to talk about the New Age stuff and how I want to know how you went from Christianity to that, and then back. Yeah. And what are your thoughts on that whole thing?
Absolutely.
Because, oh man, I mean, I think that'll really help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, good.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah,
everybody,
Josh,
thank you guys for tuning in. Dennis, I'll just close it real quick. I don't know why I jumped in.
No,
thank
good.
you guys for tuning in. Josh, thanks for coming. Guys, remember to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check out Josh Peck on all the platforms he mentioned earlier. They'll also be linked down below. And love you guys. Thank you guys. And y'all have a good evening.
Yeah.